The Texas Department of Corrections is a highly volatile and dangerous environment, filled with segregated, racially based gangs. Without a doubt, any sign of weakness makes you a prime target for predators, with death and sexual assault being a common occurrence. Not only is your time going to be more challenging if you're weak, but if you're white and unaffiliated, the chance of victimization goes through the roof. With many white inmates being victimized by other races on a routine basis, a white group was founded by a smart and charismatic man called Mark Cooper Gaspar. The organization had been around for a few years, but Gaspar wanted to change the name to attract more members. He called his organization the Aryan Circle. The AC quickly grew in size, with proven members being made to start out on a probationary period, having to take orders from higher-ups. This is standard procedure for any gang, and since this was all taking place in prison, members had to demonstrate high levels of extreme violence toward opposing gangs. Most of the time, violence was directed toward black inmates. Additionally, to be given membership, you had to be someone who had potential, both inside and outside of the TDC system. As many of the AC members were soon to be released, the gang had a desire to expand to the streets, and needed shorter stay inmates to do their bidding on the outside. Moreover, members could help to support one another once released. They could do this by offering gainful employment and a place to reside. In spite of this sounding like a promising way to return to a society which already looks down on former inmates, it was doomed to fail. The myth of unity and a support system faded once members began using drugs. Furthermore, many AC members became dealers once they hit the street. Mark Gaspar eventually left his own gang. He had created a monster. His gang had grown in numbers, but most members were drug dealers and dope fiends. The Aryan Circle was still in existence once Leighton Clem landed in prison. After putting in work, he was declared as one of the newest Aryan Circle members. At age 20, he had been sentenced to 4 years in the TDC for deadly conduct with a firearm. It is obvious to see why Clem may have wanted to join the Aryan Circle, given his ethnicity and young age. Contrary to popular belief, most younger members didn't hold racist beliefs and joined to feel a greater sense of acceptance, belonging and protection. They may have wanted to experience some action, and thus decided to join the AC. However, at its core, this is a white supremacist, or as the AC refer to it as, a white separatist organization. They believe in white pride and segregation from other races. Despite the newer generation being raised with different outlooks when it comes to culture and race, a large portion of the group still holds racist beliefs. The white race is often considered the weakest within the TDC because they have fewer numbers when compared to black or Hispanic organizations. In addition to joining for the perks of being in a gang, like protection and a sense of belonging, white inmates are required to put in work for the gang. Spilling blood is mandatory and is the only way to become a fully fledged member. Leighton Clem was one such member who put in work for the AC during his time locked up. Evidence for his membership to the AC can be seen all over his body, with Clem having been littered with white supremacist ink. He worked as a tattoo artist, and this probably helped him behind the wall. Clem's most notable tattoos included an AC tattoo on his wrist, various swastika tattoos, and the number 13 on his leg, which represents the first and third letter of the alphabet, AC. Clearly, Leighton Clem was a violent man, or at the very least, was trying to portray himself as a violent white supremacist gang member. Despite all of his tattoos, his most notable tattoo was not the white supremacist ink, rather an AK-47 with the phrase, "Revenge is easy" on the side. The foreshadowing of the AK-47 in this case is rather chilling. Tanya Little Feather Smith came into contact with Dennis Big Boy Clem. The pair had the same interests like drugs and white supremacy. Like Clem, Smith was no stranger to the justice system, and both were convicted felons. Indeed, she had experienced her fair share of arrests. Having fled from North Dakota, Smith was laying low in Texas. Her charges weren't as severe as they would be later on. Tanya Smith had failed to report to her probation officer for drug offenses, and there was now a warrant out for her arrest. Smith didn't seem bothered by the fact that she had an active warrant, and routinely made money through selling marijuana and meth, the standard Caucasian drug. Tanya Smith fell in with white supremacist ideology and had herself many tattoos, some of which Clem had done for her. These ranged from swastikas to a tattoo of a shamrock. Apparently, Smith claimed the Aryan Brotherhood, which is a rival of the Aryan Circle. Somewhere along the line, she must have realized the contradiction because she was dating a member of the AC. The tattoo was later covered up by a flower, with Leighton Clem's nickname. Regardless of who was claiming what, the couple were hitting it off and stuck by one another. Undoubtedly, they shared a close bond and were still young, both being in their early 20s. Clem and Smith were arrested trying to smuggle the devil's lettuce across the border. Both were charged with federal drug and weapon offenses, and both were sent to prison. For whatever reason, the pair both only served less than a year before being released on federal parole. Upon their releases, they immediately began violating federal release laws. The pair weren't able to be in communication, but Tanya Smith was soon living at Clem's father's residence with him. Her parole officer was aware of the communication between them both, but didn't inform on Smith. The parole officer made several warnings to her, but there were no consequences for Tanya Smith or Dennis Clem. Dennis Clem's father had passed away in March 2007 and he was now living in his father's old home. Meanwhile, Brandon Lewis and Brian Davis were in Houston. The two teenaged boys were black and were traveling with their white friend, who had grown up in the neighborhood, where all hell was soon to break loose. For whatever reason, the white friend pulled in front of Clem's house and somewhere along the line, words were exchanged between the white friend and Dennis Clem's friend. It is easy to point toward a racist comment having been made, but it could have all been over a disrespectful remark or the truck having been parked in front of Clem's home. Whatever the reason, the end result was the same. A heated argument began, which resulted in tempers flaring and egos being bruised. Suddenly, the white friend pulled a pistol and began firing at Clem's friend, who was hit 3 times and left in critical condition. Hearing the gunshots, Dennis Clem pulled out an AK-47 and proceeded to fire back at the attacker, rightfully defending his home, injured friend and family. As gunshots echoed throughout the neighborhood, the white friend realized the severity of the situation and peeled off, but Clem was not done. Standing in the middle of the street, he continued firing. The truck was half a block away by this point, but bullets continued ripping through the vehicle. Brandon and Brian were hit multiple times, with bullets passing through their bodies. Tragically, they both passed away from their injuries. Wanted for questioning in the deaths of the teenagers, Dennis Clem made the decision to make a run for it. He had vowed never to return to prison, and so I can only assume that he wasn't enthralled with the prison gang lifestyle. Some gang members want to rise through the ranks and prove themselves behind the wall. However, Clem didn't sound like someone who really wanted any part of that. A friend once described him as the silent but deadly type. Within a short space of time, police were looking for Dennis Clem and Tanya Smith. The pair were believed to have been traveling with one another. It later came out that they had fled in a Chrysler LHS, and were being supported by an Aryan Circle member. This connection enabled the couple to find safety just outside of a small town known as Bastrop, Louisiana. Additionally, prior to leaving the state of Texas, the couple managed to dodge multiple apprehensions because they had a police scanner with Houston PD radio frequencies. Dennis Clem and Tanya Smith stayed at an AC member's family property. They shot guns and planned out what to do next. Wanted for questioning for double murder must have been a shock for Dennis Clem, who knew the outcome of his decision-making. He was a felon, and even without the 2 murder charges, he was destined to head back to prison. Dennis Clem had made comments to his friend that he was going to go out in a blaze of glory. A routine police check was taking place across the street from the Bastrop police station. The Aryan Circle member who had been hiding Clem and Smith had rented them a motel room under his own name. Unfortunately for Clem and Smith, the member had a warrant for his arrest, wanted for stealing a stereo. Bastrop PD officers John Smith and Charles Wilson were sent across the street to investigate. The situation wasn't seen as serious, and so the 2 officers knocked on the motel room door, guns holstered. After a minute, the door opened and Tanya Smith greeted the 2 officers. The smell of marijuana exuding from the room caught their attention and an arrest was imminent. Knowing that he would be located, Dennis Clem armed himself and ambushed the 2 officers. They didn't have time to pull their guns before the bullets started flying. Clem was dual-wielding pistols and gunned down both officers. Returning back into the motel room, Clem said his goodbyes to Tanya Smith and reloaded his pistols. Smith made a phone call, wanting to head back to Houston before leaving the motel. Clem remained at the motel, awaiting more police, who quickly descended on the scene. An armed standoff ensued, with Dennis Clem brazenly displaying his pistols. He was bold and taunted the cops. Officers arrived and focused in on the motel room. A SWAT team prepared to make their move, in a bid to arrest Clem. However, he suddenly exited the motel room and got into a shootout with responding officers. Hit 17 times, Clem didn't make it far before dying outside his motel room. Still, he had managed to kill 2 officers and had wounded paramedics, who were desperately trying to administer first aid to the downed officers. At his autopsy, Dennis Clem was found to have marijuana and meth in his bloodstream. Unquestionably, he was paranoid and trying to blur his terrible reality with substances. He knew what his outcome was going to be, and it was only a matter of time before he was either going to be killed or receive a life sentence. Tanya Smith wasn't free for long. The U.S. Marshals apprehended her at a trailer park. She was later extradited back to Louisiana, where she was convicted of 2 counts of second-degree murder. At trial, she received 2 life sentences. The Aryan Circle distanced themselves from the crimes of Dennis Clem and Tanya Smith. Ultimately, the Aryan Circle is only really beneficial within the Texas Department of Corrections, where violence rules supreme. Once the gang entered society, the actions of certain members brought increased attention to the once secretive organization. At the end of the day, it is understandable to see why someone would join a gang whilst locked up in a volatile environment. And to its credit, the Aryan Circle was successful at getting members through prison without them being seriously harmed or killed. Even so, there are many more drawbacks to being a member of such an organization. Not only will you be labeled a racist by society, but you'll also be exposed to brutal experiences whilst incarcerated. The myth of brotherhood paired with having to experience brutal, daily violence, changes people for the worst. Many gang members can't function in normal society, find themselves hooked on drugs, and eventually return to prison. Prison experiences trigger PTSD, and nightmarish memories of moments from behind bars forever haunt gang members. The best organization is your own family and community. The people who direct you away from crime and towards something positive for everybody. Rest in peace to all of the victims of Dennis Clem and Tanya Smith.